It's not just about learning new stuff and adding new stuff to our toolbox. It's also about letting go of the stuff that no longer serves us. And execution is the name of the game. Whether you're talking about basketball or business or anything in between, it's not what you talk about. It's what you actually implement. It's what you put into action. It's what you actually execute. And complexity undermines execution.
Here's a pre-show scenario for you. Imagine you had to visit 16 houses just to cook your dinner. One place has the pots and pans, one has the stove, another has the food. You get the idea. Sounds ridiculous, right? Well, the reality is most global businesses operate the same way, using 16 different tools to hire, pay, manage, and develop their workforce. But now there's one platform that does it all. Deel. That's D-E-E-L. Deel is your forever people platform built for global payroll and HR. So whether you're an enterprise business, a small company, or something in between, Deel works for your entire team. So are you ready to transform your global payroll and HR processes? If you are, click the link in the show notes to book a demo with Deel today. That's D-E-E-L. Hello and welcome back to the HR L&D Podcast. I'm your host. My name is Nick Day. I'm CEO at JGA Recruitment Group. We're specialist global HR recruiters, now with offices in the UK, Europe, and the US as well. And actually, I'm really excited today because we are in for an exciting follow-up episode to a show that I've recorded 2 years ago. In fact, it was November 2022. We released the last episode with today's guest, Alan Stein Jr. And we were talking a lot about how to sustain your game, how to stay at the top. Now, for those that weren't familiar with the episode, well, we're going to dive a little bit into some of the content from last time. But more importantly, we're going to talk about the world of high performance, particularly in relation to how it connects with HR professionals and how it connects those that are working in learning and development as well. For those who perhaps didn't connect to the last episode, please do go back to previous episodes and find it. I said it's November 2022. But Alan is a keynote speaker. He's an author. He's a performance coach. And he spent 15 years working with elite NBA players like Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and Kobe Bryant. And he's taken that expertise and he's translated it into really powerful strategies for business performance. I cannot say this enough. Go and check out his website, alansteinjr.com. It is fantastic. It's full of resources, tips, great quotes, loads of program notes. Look, I could spend an hour talking about how good this website is, guys. So please do check it out. But what I do want to tell you is, look, he has really expanded his focus since we last spoke to really concentrate on organizational and sales performance. And I know that some of his insights are really going to help reinforce some of the things that the HR leaders that check into this show want to do right now when they're trying to maintain performance at the top level. So look, I don't want to talk any longer. I've got a great guest with me. Alan, welcome back to the HR L&D Podcast. How you feeling?
Oh man, it's so great to be back with you. I can't believe it's been 2 years. Wow, the 2 years went by really fast. And yeah, it's awesome to reconnect. We had a wonderful conversation last time, and I'm equally excited to have an even better conversation this time.
We did. I actually got to enjoy you again because after you recorded with you, I think a month after we released, I heard you on the High Performance Podcast, one of my favorite shows. Brilliant conversation there. So for those who haven't checked that out, I recommend that as well. And obviously, since we last recorded, you've published a new book as well called Raise Your Game. So maybe let's start there. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing in the last 2 years. You've released a new book. You've done a lot more as well. Bring us up to speed.
Well, I think the best way to get everyone up to speed is my calling mantra, especially for those of you that are watching us visually on video right now, is the sign above my head, which I'm all about simplifying success. You know, as I continue to get older and hopefully wiser and more mature with more life experience, my main goal now is to untether from the things that no longer serve me, from the things that may be holding me back. It's not just about learning new stuff and adding new stuff to our toolbox. It's also about letting go of the stuff that no longer serves us. And, you know, I think a great place for us to start is kind of this mantra of execution is the name of the game. I mean, really, whether you're talking about basketball or business or anything in between, it's not what you talk about. It's what you actually implement. It's what you put into action. It's what you actually execute. And complexity undermines execution. So as HR professionals, as executives, as leaders, just as members of our own communities, we should be doing everything we can to untether from the unnecessarily complex and make things as simplified as possible. That increases the chance that everyone on the team will comply, buy in, believe in, and get things done.
There's an I don't know if I'm going to get this exactly right, but I'll tell you what resonates. There's a quote that goes something along the lines of, some people think smart is clever, but smart people know simple is clever. And that's the other side of that complexity piece, right? And so let's dive into that then with your own journey. I'm just keen to know, what are some of the things that you've had to let go, some of the things that you've had to do to simplify your own success, or not simplify your success, but simplify the things that's got you to your level of success?
Well, generally speaking, it kind of comes down to my main focal point and main, mantra and philosophy towards every area of my life, which is never getting bored with the basics, which learning how to master the fundamentals and working relentlessly towards mastery of the fundamentals, primarily during the unseen hours. I believe we live in a society, understandably, that wants us to chase what's new and what's flashy, wants us to chase the shiny object, wants us to look for the hacks and the shortcuts and the new ways of doing things, when in most areas, working towards mastery of the basics will certainly get the job done. And that's not to say that we don't embrace new technologies. I mean, I think we can all agree AI, for example, is a game changer and is here to stay. But my approach would be to learn the basics, the fundamentals of how you can use and implement and integrate AI into your business, and then focus on those handful of principles. Don't try to chase everything new and shiny and sexy, but focus on the fundamentals, because that's the foundation to which the rest of the house is built. So for me, it's looking at every area of my life, whether it's being a keynote speaker and a business owner, or whether it's being a father, and saying, okay, what are the handful of basic principles and basic fundamentals that if I work towards mastery of them, I'll continue to elevate my game in any one of those domains. So really simplifying success is getting clarity on the fundamentals that you need to focus on, and then learning how to let go from everything else.
You know what? It reminds me of something my dad used to tell me. He used to say, I'm someone that does get tempted by these shiny objects. So I like to throw myself into everything I see. He'd say to me, look, Nick, the hunter that tries to catch 2 rabbits catches neither one. What is it you want to do? Focus there first. And he was right. That always comes back to me. And I always think, okay, what am I doing right now? Catch myself. Take a moment, bring the awareness back into the room and go, what is it I really want here? Do I need to be chasing 2 things, or focus on the simplicity of focusing on one and putting all my attention into that? And it reminds me of something you told me last time we recorded together. You said to me, when we were talking about sustaining your game, you said, Nick, you have these amazing players that finally get into the NBA. They've worked their entire lives to get to this point. They've trained endless hours. And I think it was something along the lines of you saying to them, when they get to the NBA, the first thing they cannot do then is rest. This is when the hard work starts, right? It's now that you've got to the NBA to sustain that level of performance. A lot of players would lose it at that point. They think they've made it and they relax and they stop doing the things that got them there. And those that really make it, some of the stars I mentioned in my introduction, are those that will continue able to reinvent themselves and stay motivated and do those things. So if we bring that down into an HR context, HR is playing a crucial role at the moment in bridging the gap between individual performance and organizational performance, 2 things that you absolutely specialize in. So if they want to sustain their game in doing those 2 objectives, how do we do that? How do we simplify that process? What kind of recommendations or insights can we give to help them today?
Well, I have so much admiration and respect for the HR professionals, because in every organization, especially larger ones that continue to scale, the HR professionals are really the glue that holds everything together. As you just said, they're the conduit and the go-between between individual performance and organizational performance, and their role is often underappreciated. Unfortunately, many people think of HR as kind of the disciplinary force and compliance and things like that, when that's only one small sliver of the totality of the pie, in which they make a massive contribution to the organization. So, their role is vital. So I would ask that HR professionals, especially those with some tenure and some experience, is you do an exercise where you get clarity on the skill sets that you believe best serve you as an HR professional. What are the skill sets that you use to best connect with and communicate on an individual basis? What are the skill sets that you use to develop cohesion and collaboration, to build the type of culture which will allow you to have very high organizational performance? And then continue to focus on those. I mean, communication is probably the most obvious one.
Sure.
An HR professional has to be an expert in communication in really all formats. They need to be good at written communication, being able to send out memos and emails. They need to be great with interpersonal communication and having one-on-one meetings, but they also need to be able to address the group as a whole. So they need to be very well versed in communication. And as any good HR professional will tell you, a good portion of that communication is the listening component. Most people tend to think of communication as the talking, which being able to convey a message, succinctly and clearly is certainly important. But I think what will really separate HR professionals is their ability to listen. And I mean that literally, as in if you are meeting with someone, actively listening and connecting with them, listening with the intent to learn what it is that they're trying to share. But I also mean it somewhat metaphorically. Like you have to be able to listen to the pulse of your organization. You have to be able to listen to what's actually going on and how is morale and how are people buying in and believing into the vision and the mission. Are people really championing the core values, or are they just something that are kind of a throwaway? So I think one of the most important skill sets for HR professionals to develop and continue to hone is the ability to listen, both on the micro and the macro.
Yeah, very hard to argue against that. I think they've got some challenges ahead. They're change managers. They're almost cultural architects within their organization. And what I find interesting in the response you've just given there, you used some interesting words. And I don't know if it's because of your background in elite level performance, but you said, they've got to champion certain behaviors. And obviously you've worked in environments where there are literal athletic champions in those teams, and they have to have a certain mindset, right? So if we think about that cultural dynamic that you were kind of inferring a moment ago, and how important that is to understand the temperature check of the organization and how it's feeling, and having that kind of listening skill to understand the dynamics within an organization. What are some of the skills that you've learned dealing with those elite, in those elite performance environments, so elite team environments, where without that team, there is no success? And what kind of those lessons have you learned? Well, from that experience, can we then apply in that HR environment to really help with that crossover, help with that cultural dynamism, if you like?
Well, one of the most important, both individually and organizationally, is getting everyone to understand the importance of accountability. Creating a high-performing culture has a lot to do with everyone on the team's openness to giving and receiving honest feedback, and to being able to give and receive accountability, being able to hold everyone to an incredibly high standard of excellence. And it's so important that everybody on the team knows that holding someone accountable is something you do for them. It's not something you do to them. That holding a teammate accountable, or holding someone accountable, a coworker, a colleague, is the best gift that you can give them. Because when you hold someone to an incredibly high standard of excellence, in essence, what you're saying is, I care so much about you, and I care so much about our organization and team, that I'm not going to let you get away with doing less than your best. I'm not going to let you get away with not fulfilling your role to the best of your ability. I'm not going to let you get away with violating one of our core values. I'm not going to let you get away with showing up with a bad attitude or not giving a good effort. I'm not going to let you get away with behaviors that are not congruent with our mission or our core values and vision. So really, in essence, it's getting everyone to understand that creating a high standard of excellence and then caring enough to hold each other to the highest level of accountability is a gift, and it's a prerequisite to creating a high performing culture. And once again, HR professionals are kind of the gateways to this accountability culture. They're the liaisons that are responsible for keeping everyone buying into these really high standards of excellence. And we should all want people in our lives that hold us to a high standard. We should crave people in our life that challenge us and push us and care enough to give us honest, open feedback. And when you can create a culture where, regardless of where someone falls on the org chart, doesn't matter if they're at the top or they're at the bottom, they understand that giving honest feedback in real time is not a nice to have, it's a necessity. I mean, that is the only way an organization can continue to grow, continue to scale, and continue to push to their limits. is if people care enough to give feedback.
I mean, you may have just answered the question there in that response, but I'm intrigued to see if there's anywhere else you can take it, or whether we can build on that. But are there any sort of commonalities that you've seen between working with NBA superstars, actually right at the top of their game, and now with the business leaders that you're giving keynotes to and you're supporting from a coaching standpoint? Are there any commonalities that are working their way across both spectrums?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, almost every major trait that would allow someone to succeed on the basketball court are the exact same traits that would allow someone to be successful in business. Now, the way that those manifest are certainly different when you're talking about a physical sport versus business. There's some nuance to that, but the traits themselves, if I were to list the traits that make the best basketball players in the world, the best basketball players in the world, and the best CEOs or the best HR professionals, you would see so much transfer because there's so much utility in all of those traits. And, some of them are things we've already covered, like, having the humility to lean into the basics, to never get bored with the basics and work on the fundamentals. But another one that I've noticed that transcends every industry and every type of business, especially, is learning how to embrace the process. We all live in a very outcome-oriented society, and we all have goals. And I think having goals are fantastic for providing clarity and direction. But those that are really successful in any endeavor are ones that can focus on the process. They've learned to design systems and processes that if they stick to those on a daily basis, it inches them closer to whatever goal that they've set. And, there's a huge difference between outcome-oriented goals and process-oriented goals. And it's been my experience that those that can focus daily on the process usually end up performing at a higher level and certainly sustain that high level of performance for much longer.
Nice. I want to touch on the sustaining piece. I know we've done a whole hour episode on this in the past, talking about your wonderful book, Sustain Your Game, which I think I have here on my bookshelf. I'll grab it out in just a second. It's here somewhere. A brilliant book that I recommend highly, and I'll put a link in the show notes for those who are interested in finding out more. But I want to just bring it back to sustaining excellence, because when you work in HR and you get to the top of that tree, let's say, we've got HR directors, CHROs listening to this, it can be quite a lonely place. And often the higher up the chain you go, the lonelier it becomes. You have less peers around you. People start looking upwards for support, and there's nowhere to look up yourself because you kind of got to the top of the tree. And I remember listening to, if you look at the High Performance podcast, very famous athletes that have won World Cups and different things like that. And suddenly, after that point's passed, they've worked so hard to get there, they suddenly feel that sense almost of loss. So what are some of the advice you could give to those that are listening or watching this that maybe have just got to the top of their ambition, if you like, or initial ambition? What can they do to help maintain that level of performance over the longer term? How do they sustain it?
Well, there's a variety of things that you need to do to continue and sustain. One of the most influential has to do with your inputs and what you choose to consume. And as you just said so insightfully, who you choose to invest your time with. We live in a society where we're always being graded on our outputs, on our production. But what directly impacts outputs are inputs. It's what we choose to read, watch, and listen to, and it's who we choose to invest our time with. And if you do happen to find yourself organizationally in a position where you feel a little bit isolated, as you said, you're at the top of the org chart and you feel kind of lonely. Well, there are certainly peers. You certainly have people that feel that way in other businesses and other industries. And, you can be a part of a mastermind group, or you can even kind of create your own mastermind group where you have some other people that might be feeling the same way you are. One thing I know for certain on a planet where there's 8 billion of us is even in times where you feel isolated and you feel alone, I promise you, you're not. I promise you, you are not the only person that is going through what you're going through and feeling what you're feeling. You just need to be a little bit more proactive in being able to reach out. But one of the things that's amazing about the world that we live in today, which is certainly different than maybe 20 or 30 years ago, is the interconnectivity we have through the internet and through social media platforms. There is no shortage of videos or blogs or articles or Facebook or LinkedIn groups of people that are at a level that you're at where you can reach out. And hopefully, with them being peers, you guys can exchange best practices. You can talk about the struggles and the challenges you're facing. You can offer advice or recommendations for things you've implemented that have worked well. So all it takes is being a little bit more proactive. But one thing I'll say is if you find that your outputs are starting to stagnate, then I always recommend that you shake up your inputs. Start reading, watching, and listening to different material and different content. Start following on social different people. Start investing your time, whether it's virtually like you and I are doing right now or in person with different groups of people to really shake up the input side so that you can start getting some different outputs.
I think it's really interesting because we are moving into an era, we've moved into an era really of a very much a globally distributed workforce now, right? Where I think people feel even more alone sometimes because we feel a little bit more almost disconnected in a hyper-connected world. It's strange, but we're connecting now in more virtual rooms rather than face-to-face. And there is a difference, there's nuance. But because you're talking a lot about the importance of inputs rather than outputs, and in that context, how do HR professionals maintain a really high-performance culture in an era of remote work, gig economy, virtual meetings, things like that? Any approaches or tactics you'd give them?
You have to be unbelievably organized, and you do have to create systems and processes. There's no argument that HR professionals' jobs became increasingly harder when the workforce started to disperse and many people were working remotely. I think it was very easy for many people to take for granted the old brick and mortar when everyone was coming into the exact same office from 9 to 5 every single day, and you were able to physically see people. You bump into them at the water cooler, you have lunch with them, maybe you walk to the parking lot at the end of the day with them. And that just made it easier to have some of these smaller touch points and connections. And then because of the pandemic, when things started to turn remote and virtual, and I know that in many cases is still the same, all that's done is just made HR professionals' jobs more difficult. It certainly doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means that it's going to be a little bit more challenging, and most likely will take a little bit more thought and premeditation and strategy behind it. There's a concept that I learned from a friend of mine called systemized thoughtfulness. And the way that she implemented this was she would block off time every single week, like an hour or two, just to handwrite thank you notes to friends. And the systematized part of that was it was on her schedule every single week was this hour block to handwrite thank you notes. But then the thoughtfulness side was those that were receiving those hand-filled notes, they didn't feel like they were just one of a number. They didn't feel like, that anything had been systematized. When they received that handwritten note of gratitude, it was very personalized to them. So being able to create those types of touch points is just an example of what HR professionals can use. Is you can say, all right, I'm looking at the team as a whole. And one of the things that's most important when looking at a team is matching what each person's needs are. You may have a member of your team that's been with your organization for 10 years and, they know their role, they embrace their role, they star in their role, they're fully ingrained to the company's culture. They don't necessarily need a lot of hand-holding. They're veterans in the space. Well, that person's needs are going to be very different than someone that maybe you onboarded a year ago, or someone that maybe transitioned into a new role or a new department. They might need more of your time. They might need more of your help. So this is not about equality. This is not saying, hey, I've got 20 people and I have to make sure that I give each person 1 hour of my time every week. No, the person that's a veteran might need just a quick 10-minute check-in once every Friday morning. But the person that just transitioned to a new department or just started with your organization, they might need 2 hours a week of your time and your ability to help mentor and to pour into them. So don't worry about dividing up the pie equally. Look more based on needs and where you can make the biggest impact. And then figure out a way to try and create a rhythm of touch points and check-ins that meets their needs. And once again, things can be somewhat individualized. You may have a member of your team that if you send them a text every other morning as a check-in, that is more than sufficient. You might have another member of your team that would actually like to see you on video and set up a Zoom call, for 30 minutes every Wednesday afternoon. So a lot of it has to do with caring enough about your team to reach out and customize and personalize the types of touch points that are necessary for everyone to feel included, everyone to feel heard, everyone to feel safe, everyone to not feel isolated, especially if they're working remotely. And if you are able to put together that type of framework, then I've seen firsthand groups with, large teams spread out all over the United States and still feel like they're a very cohesive and collaborative group because the HR professionals went the extra mile to make those very personalized touch points.
Hello, HR and people leaders. Are you exhausted of the war for talent cliche? The problem is when we hear a cliche, it usually exists for a reason. However, we think it's time for a fresh approach to the talent crisis. That's because at JGA Recruitment, we understand the real challenges you face in sourcing phenomenal HR and people candidates. And guess what? We think we have the solution. Our team is on a mission to revolutionize your hiring process. That's because we're not just recruiters, we're strategic partners dedicated to finding HR and people professionals who align perfectly with your company's vision and goals. So let's break the cycle of frustration together. Partner your talent acquisition strategies with JGA Recruitment and experience the difference in service, excellence, and results. No longer do you need to suffer the costs associated with a poor hire, because with over 100 five-star Google reviews and already trusted by many of the world's leading brands, why don't you take action today? Contact us at jgarecruitment.com to discover how we can help transform your HR and people teams. And here's a bonus. When you visit us, you can sign up for our weekly HR newsletter that's packed with invaluable industry insights and more. Let's revolutionize your HR talent acquisition strategies together and make the war for talent a cry from the past. Visit jjrecruitment.com to find out more.
Yeah, you raised a few interesting points I want to summarize and just bring back because I think it's really relevant, and a couple of things that you got my mind whirring when you were going through some of those examples. And one of those is your emphasis really on the human touch point, because it's so easy now in a world of AI and so much digital opportunities to connect that sometimes we forget about the power that human approach actually has. So yes, it's nice and it's a good thing to do in the way that you've systemized it, but sometimes to take that a level further, like for an employee to get that, if we're really focused on performance management, if you want to really motivate your performance of your employees, you want to feel like you've been seen and feel like you've been heard. And I think that the way you emphasize the importance of that personal touch in an automated world, an ever increasing automated world, I think becomes even more important, particularly with those globally distributed workforces, right? So I think it was a really interesting example that for me hit home, that sometimes even myself, maybe I'm relying a little bit too much on AI to say, hey, thanks. And actually I might just improve performance a little bit more by taking that extra moment to write it myself. And I can see the value in that. I know also in the programs, you deliver a number of programs. Again, you can find these on your Wicked website, but tell us a little bit about how they run, because all of them, I think there's a common theme here. They all emphasize storytelling. And I think storytelling is an unused, or not used enough, shall I say, kind of tactic or technique that I think HR professionals could utilize more, particularly in relation to telling stories of their companies, emphasizing behaviors and values, or motivating employees. I know it's something that you are really passionate about because it comes through in your work. So tell us a little bit about your connection with storytelling and perhaps how HR professionals can utilize that tactic.
Stories are the most effective way to change someone's emotional temperatures. Stories are the best way to change someone's emotional state. And the only way you can get someone to change their behaviors, their decision-making, their habits, or even their overall attitude towards a company is by changing their emotional state. So stories are what will sway emotion, and emotion is what will get people to behave differently. And ultimately, that's our job, as leaders and as HR professionals. And stories don't have to be these grandiose, stories that could end up being a Hollywood blockbuster movie. A story can be a quick 15-second example of something, as you just said, that someone previously did in the company, or it can be an analogy that you make through parenting. That there's lots of leadership traits that we as parents know intuitively, but they're the exact same types of principles that we can apply at work. So stories are just a great way as well to make what you're sharing more memorable, more meaningful, and stickier. So I highly encourage folks that anytime, instead of just telling someone what to do or just giving them a stat, and there are certainly places that it's appropriate to give certain statistics and research and so forth. But if you really want to make things sticky, learn to tell stories. You know, if you have somebody on your team, as I said in the previous hypothetical example, you know, maybe they've just switched departments and they're taking on a new role and they're struggling a little bit. Well, has there been a time in your company where someone else has experienced something similar and you can tell them the story of, hey, you know, a couple of years ago, we had so-and-so that also had this same struggle, and here's something that he did or she did, and now look how well they're doing. Like things like that, they bring a level of reality in, and it's less about, you know, telling people, but more about them getting to feel and to experience. So I think anytime we're in positions of leadership and positions where we're trying to influence behavior, which is in essence what we're doing in HR, it's certainly in your best interest to work on your storytelling chops.
Perfect. So we're thinking then about, we've got structured personalization personalized touch points. We've got storytelling as something we can use more effectively in HR. What are some of the other emerging trends that you're coming across in the work that you do in performance coaching that perhaps HR professionals might be, probably should be aware of or might be able to benefit them?
Well, one is, I think it's so important to embrace that as human beings, we are very holistic, and that it's really hard as humans to separate our personal lives and our professional lives. I think most people, if they're being honest and they're listening to this, can agree that when things are going really well at work, you tend to have, you tend to be in a better mood when you're at home. When things are going really well at home, you tend to bring that positive energy into work. And of course, the inverse of that is true. If you're going through something at home, a challenge maybe with your spouse or one of your children or a sick relative, it's really hard to compartmentalize that and show up to work and not let it have any type of effect on you. And the reason I bring that up is within appropriate boundaries, of course, I think it's important that when we're checking in, some of these check-ins every week should have nothing to do with a specific project or nothing to do with work. It should be more along the lines of, hey, Nick, I just wanted to check in and see what's going on in your world. How are things with you? And leave it intentionally very open-ended, where you have the opportunity that once we've created the type of rapport and safe environment where you believe that you can open up and be honest, then maybe you'll be willing to share some of those things. And the reason that's so important is if I've noticed as an HR professional that your productivity and your work has been suffering the last couple of weeks, the easy thing to do is to place judgment on you or make an assumption, to think that you're not trying hard enough, or maybe that you're not buying in, or, give you some type of consequence for your low performance. When if I would care enough just to extend an olive branch to find out what's going on, and maybe you say, hey, my grandmother's been really sick. My grandmother's one of the most important people in my life, and she just went into hospice, and it's really weighing on me. I haven't been sleeping very well. Like, that ability for you to share that human side will give me, hopefully, the requisite empathy and compassion to say, okay, there's a reason Nick's performance is starting to slide a little bit. He's going through something really tough and challenging. And the last thing I want to do is, make him pay a consequence for that. What I want to do is make sure he knows he is fully supported, that we care about him, that we're so sorry for what he's going through. And if there's anything we can do to extend some latitude, maybe give you a day off where you can go spend some time with your grandma, like whatever it may be. I find that if we're open to connecting as human beings first and as employees second, that can make all the difference in the world, especially with how people feel about your organization and people's commitment and buy-in and believe in. So I think when we're making sure that we're trying to systematize all of these different touch points, that some of them have nothing to do with work, nothing to do with a deadline or project, nothing to do with their role. We're just connecting as human being to human being. And it's important for that, everyone in the organization to have that type of feeling. I've always been a believer on a team. When you personally, when things are going really well in your life and you're just in the flow, you're in the zone, things are going great, you need to keep your eyes open for anyone on the team that might be struggling and extend a hand out to try and help them and support them. Then on the other side of that, anytime you are struggling, you're going through some challenges, you're in a little bit of a dark place, you need to have the courage to reach a hand out and ask for help, to be able to tell somebody, hey, I'm going through, fill in the blank. I have a sick child at home. I'm going through a divorce. I'm going, whatever it may be, is being able to let someone know so that they can hopefully help. And when you've created an organization where people are always reaching a hand out, they're either reaching a hand out to ask for help or they're reaching a hand out to offer help, then you've got something really special.
I'm really glad. Whether you've done this without realizing it or with full awareness, I don't know, Alan, but I'm going to call it now. But there's a lot of uncertainty in the world of HR because of AI, right? And because they're worried about whether it can automate some of the tasks that HR professionals do. And I wasn't expecting to go here, by the way, on today's show. But I think you raised a really interesting point, because a lot of the things you were talking about there in that human relationship piece, the giving, the caring, the empathetic stage, the compassion, these are all things that aren't based on really on data sets. I think certainly in the current world of AI, you can feed into AI, right? It's nuanced. It needs contextualization. It needs human judgment and understanding. And AI is only as good as the data you feed it. But the emotional side, like, as you say, it's not always what happens in terms of a data set at work. Your performance metrics at work are always, as you highlighted, influenced by things outside of that work environment. And I think you've actually just stressed the absolute necessity for that human touch in that HR role, and why it's so strategically important, because if you're not looking after your workforce, your productivity is going to suffer, the optimization is going to suffer, and all the things that come with it, right? And I think you've absolutely nailed that point, because I think you really highlighted the importance of nuance and contextualization and empathy. And I think HR professionals, certainly the leaders I've come to work with, they always show huge degree, massive degrees of empathy and compassion. And yes, they've got a difficult role of plate spinning, and they have to do some of the difficult stuff and disciplinaries and things as well. But you know what? If you haven't got that empathy or that compassion, you're going to struggle. And if you outsource that to AI, I think AI is going to struggle in terms of that organizational dynamic. And I know the work you've been doing with HR leaders really does support some of those areas. You look at individual leadership, organizational leadership, sales performance, how to sustain excellence. Tell us a little bit about some of those pillars then, because I think they really drive this message home of why people are so important to organizational success.
Well, you just hit something so important and so insightful. And that is, at the end of the day, leadership is all about people. It's about humanity. It's about connectivity. It's about traits, as you just mentioned, like empathy and compassion. And those are things that, at least at present, are incredibly difficult for AI to replicate. So when it comes to AI, and then I'll get back to what you asked, I think what's important is for HR professionals, first of all, is to not come from a place of scarcity or fear where you're worried that AI is going to be able to replace you, but instead lean into that and say, AI is not going anywhere. And how can I best utilize AI to, for some of the plates that I am spinning, some of the tasks that I have, how can I actually use AI to become more efficient and effective, which will free up more time for me to spend on the human side of things? HR professionals have a pretty long checklist of things they're responsible for. Well, if a third of those things can be done more efficiently through AI, that's going to free up more time for you to have these human connections and these human conversations, and to really lean on the part that AI will never be able to replicate. So I don't think it's in anyone's best interest to come from a place of fear where you're worried that you're going to be replaced by AI, but instead say, how can I actually use AI as a way for me to be more impactful? How can I make that a tool in my toolbox that will allow me to be more impactful, more influential, and more deeply connect with those on my team? And that's how I think we should be viewing any type of new technology, because I don't think AI in and of itself is good or bad. I don't think social media is good or bad. I think it's all in how it's used. It's all in the intent. It's all in the way we choose to frame it. If you use social media as a way to connect, as a way to learn, as a way to share, social media can be an incredibly powerful platform. Whereas if you use it as a time suck where you're just scrolling and playing the comparison game, and every time you look at social media, you feel worse about yourself because you see what everyone else has and what everyone else is doing, and it makes you feel less than, then in that context, social media can be incredibly detrimental. But there's nothing positive or negative about social media. It is inherently neutral. It's unbiased until we attach intent and purpose in how we use it. And the same thing with AI. If I was an HR professional, I would say what things on my plate can become way more efficient and effective by the use of integrating AI, which will then allow me to free up more time to make these human connections, which is what I do so well. And that's really what will shift that balance, because at the end of the day, what everyone should want, HR should be the everyone's favorite department within an organization. And I think, unfortunately, in many cases, it's not the case. As you said, many people look at HR as compliance, as the disciplinarian. When there's something wrong with my paycheck, then I have to go to HR. That's only a very, very small sliver of what HR actually provides. But if you can start to change that narrative where people think of HR as someone that cares, someone that supports, someone that has empathy and compassion, someone that is a resource to help me do my job to the best of my ability, then you swing that pendulum back in the other direction, and HR becomes, without question, the most valuable department in any organization.
Yeah, I think if I was to ask most people who listen to this show why they got into HR, they would pretty much all talk about the human element of HR, how they want to have an impact on employees' lives and give a positive output. And yet the plate spinning, that's a great place to start. You highlighted it brilliantly, right? So look at your plates. Which are the things you can outsource or give to AI? I would make a guess that most of those things aren't the human-based things that we're talking about. They aren't the things we got into the profession to get involved with in the first place. They probably are data-orientated tasks, looking at predictive trends, creating reports, whatever that might be. If that's the stuff you hate, that's where AI can really come to the fore and allows you to really focus on what you do best, which is that human element, which you absolutely highlighted so brilliantly, which is fantastic. Now, I know that...
one other point to that is I've explained that to some HR professionals before about the importance of making time for these personal connections and these personal touches. And very understandably, some of the pushback I've received is, I don't have time for that extra work. And I usually say with a huge smile and a wink, that's not extra work. That is the work.
Right.
The being able to provide a safe, inclusive environment where everyone feels heard, that is the work. All of the other stuff is now supplemental. That needs to be the priority. Because if you get every single person on the team to have full commitment, buy-in, and believe in, they want to maximize their role to the best of their ability so that they can make a maximum contribution to everyone and everything around them. That's a high-performing culture. So that actually is the job. All of the other stuff is supplemental to that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So there's a really good opportunity for those listening to this to create that list. What are the things you love doing? And why did you get into the profession? What are the things you hate doing? And what can you delegate? What can you delegate not just to AI, but to those around you? One thing I've discovered is sometimes the things that we individually don't like doing is often the thing that someone else loves doing. But if we don't ask that question, we can't delegate it anyway. We make assumptions based on our own beliefs that no one else, if I don't like this, no one else is going to like it either. And actually, there'll be someone probably in your team or your organization that might go, hey, I'll do that task. I love that work. I love getting deep into the analytics. Give that to me or give it to AI. And it frees you up in that way. I'm a big believer in energy audits and sort of getting rid of some of that stuff and freeing up that stuff. And that's just one of the small tactics you've highlighted brilliantly. But there are others as well. I want to take us into your current book, your Raise Your Game. You obviously do workshops on not just raising individual games, but raising team games as well. So you really mastered both subjects. I wonder if you could just bring the book to life. Tell us about what we can learn through the book, any strategies perhaps we haven't touched upon yet that our HR viewers and listeners can discover.
Well, I wrote Raise Your Game in a very intentional way where there's three different sections. There's the section for the individual, there's the section for the leader, and then there's the section for the team. But what's most important is the way those three things interact with each other, and that really in our lives, we kind of ebb and flow into all of those different areas at different times. Sometimes we are the employee, we are the player, if you will, in sport. But then other times we are asked to lead. We are, in charge of others. And then, of course, in some capacity, we're always a part of something bigger than ourselves. I mean, obviously, if we work in an organization, we're a part of a team. So really, it's just a matter of being able to navigate through those three different types of positions. And there's so much utility between them. It's not like any of those things are mutually exclusive. So really, it's just a collection of best practices and systems and concepts on how someone can continue to, raise their game, if you will. And we're talking about the ability to influence and impact and personal productivity and contribution and significance in each of those different domains.
Now, I know that we've covered two of those domains, I think, in a fair bit of detail today. One of those being collaboration, the importance of bringing teams together, delegating work. The other being communication, which you discussed in great detail at the start of this show. There's another element, those 3 C's in your book that come through quite strong. And the other one is cohesion. Tell us a little bit about how we can help build cohesion within those teams. We've touched upon it for sure, but we have got distributed workforces, and you've talked about that networking. But I wonder if there's anything else we can do for those perhaps that really are struggling with team cohesion. They've got a cultural challenge or cultural project they need to try and bring people together. What are some of the things you might advise to help them along with that challenge?
The most important part and concept when it comes to cohesion is be the teammate that you want to play with. If you think back to the best teammates that you've ever had in your life, and this might have been someone you played sports with when you were young, it might be someone on your current team now, but think of the traits of your favorite teammates of all time, and then have the humility and vulnerability and courage to ask yourself, well, how well are you, exemplifying those traits? If the best teammate that you've ever had in your life was hardworking and had a great attitude and was selfless, well, then ask yourself, how hard do you work? How good is your attitude? How selfless are you? I'm a big believer both in leadership and in being a teammate. If you're going to expect it of others, you first need to expect it of yourself. It's the easiest way to erode team cohesion is to expect others to do the things that you're not willing to do yourself. So find what traits you find most endearing in a teammate and do the best you can to bring that to the table. And when everyone is willing to make that same type of sacrifice and commitment, and everyone understands that the we is more important than the me, then you'll naturally start to see an increase in team cohesion.
So, Alan, look, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've discovered more about your wonderful book. We've talked about communication. We've talked about collaboration. We've talked about empathy and all the importance of human touch points. What's the one thing we haven't touched upon yet? Perhaps a question I haven't asked that you want to leave a little bit of something with our listeners that for them to think about, something for them to take away?
I would say it's that everything that we've talked about, from individual performance to organizational performance and everything in between, it's not a finite destination. It's a continual journey. It's a continual process. And it's important to have different goals and different landmarks of things that we're trying to achieve, but it's never really a destination that you arrive at. It's kind of like physical fitness. You can't plant your flag in the ground and announce to the world, I'm physically fit, and then stop working out, stop eating healthy, stop getting sleep, because then you'll no longer be physically fit. It's something that needs to become a way of life. It needs to be just part of your daily routine. And it's the same thing with HR professionals. All of the stuff that we talked about, it's not let's try this for a month and let's see what happens. These are things that we need to integrate in to our daily behaviors, our daily habits, the way that we help mold and shape our organizations, and that it's a continual process. And then throughout that process, we need to lean on the most effective adage for success in history, which is do more of what works and do less of what doesn't. So part of being in HR, and we covered this in the very beginning when we talked about listening, especially in the metaphorical way, is being able to take a look at the landscape of your organization and look at what things are working well and are resonating and people are buying into, and keep doing more of that. And then figure out what things where you're starting to get some friction and things aren't working out as well, and either do less of it or figure out ways to tweak it. But it's got to be in constant motion. And then really lean into this concept of systematic, progressive, incremental gains. The way I like to frame it from an organizational standpoint or from an individual standpoint, can I be a little bit better in 2025 than I was in 2024? Can I be a little bit better in November than I was in October? Can I be a little bit better today than I was yesterday? And if you can consistently answer yes to that most of the time in most areas of your life, then you'll know you're moving in the right direction. And to me, that is what's most important. It's not where you are in the moment, but it's more in the direction that you're headed. And as long as you're headed in a direction that's moving you forward, then that should be something that helps motivate and inspires you.
Amazing. Well, I thoroughly enjoyed listening to you today. I mean, as you know, I'm a passionate sports fan, passionate about the work that you do. I've enjoyed following your journey, which is why I was delighted to have you back on the show again, Alan Stein Jr. So thank you ever so much for joining me again today. And you've just reminded me of the fact we all play an infinite game, not a finite one. So as much as we think about sport, right, the decisions we take today and the decisions we're dealing with, we don't know if they're good or they're bad or they're indifferent. We'll discover that in the journey of time. But if we stay positive and follow the path you've just given us, which is a one of marginal gains, then hopefully, as you say, we're moving in the right direction. For those that want to find out more, I have to say once again, it's a brilliant website, but also it gives you some access to some phenomenal courses. So if you're interested in raising the game of either your own game or the games of your team or your organization, do check out alansteinjr.com. That's Alan, A-L-A-N, Stein, S-T-E-I-N-J-R.com. And you can access all the different courses. You can access the 2 wonderful books he's written. There's keynote talks. There's so much you can get from this website. Do check it out. Please do go along. And I will put a link in the show notes. I'll also put a link to his latest book as well, Raise Your Game, which is available now. So, Alan, thank you so much for joining me once again on the HR L&D podcast. Listen, I love having you on the show. It's been my absolute pleasure. And thank you for your wisdom, your insights, and your passion. Appreciate it.
Oh, that feeling is so mutual. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and put on the calendar 2 years from now. I'll come back.
We'll do it. 100%. It's been my pleasure.
This episode is sponsored by Deal. That's D-E-E-L. Deal is your forever people platform built for global payroll and HR. So whether you're an enterprise business, a small company, or something in between, Deal works for your team. Hire and onboard talent in over 150 countries in minutes and run payroll in over 100 countries in just a few clicks. And with Deal's suite of AI-powered learning and development tools, you can even customize career roadmaps, performance assessments, and more. So are you ready to transform your global payroll and HR processes? If you are, click the link in the show notes to book a demo with Deal today. That's D-E-E-L.